Welcome back to this class of New Testament background. This will be week number 6. So we are already over halfway, and this is where we left off last week, speaking about environmental backgrounds. The background, it involves everything we are and everything that we have to live in. Thus, the environment is, today it is one of the major concerns, right? And environmental issues are, especially that climate change is an issue. But we have grown up in a different climate and different weather than that we find in the Gospel, New Testament. It's land of Palestine, and it's a semi-arid kind of climate, pretty much similar to the California desert weather and climate. So we who live in California, we can probably easily associate with some of the climate and weather mentioned in the New Testament. But otherwise, who had grown up in other countries, in other climate, it does require a certain study and research to understand how that is. So it does mention in the New Testament and Old Testament rain and snow, of course, and seasons, even though their seasons are a little different than our 4 seasons that we experience in Korea. And in Vietnam, I believe it's pretty long, right? So the weather on north is a little different than weather in the south. But mainly it has a rainy season and then dry season. Is that correct? Okay. So that's in Africa where I was. It's clearly divided into rainy season and dry season. In the dry season, there's no single rain, and rainy season it rains a lot. So I know how that is. But unless you live in that particular climate and the region, and then you don't have that real deep understanding of that weather and season. So generally we have 4 different seasons, like a spring, summer, fall, and the winter. But in the gospel, the Palestinian land of Palestine, they would have a long summer and pretty short spring and fall, almost no spring and no fall. So that's kind of difference. Then winds, it doesn't mention winds, and then plants and animals. So these are some of the things that we also need to know to better understand the documents and text in the New Testament. Okay, continuing. Social background domains. Okay, now this is more important than what we see in these environmental background, because it relates to their actual existence, and because it's a social issues, it does have implications such as spiritual and ethical implications. When something that the elements that we read from the Bible, when it has these ethical and spiritual, moral, and mental even implications, then we think it is important, and on those things we will try to focus and try to have a better understanding on those issues. So first, one of them would be the class and the ranks. Okay, even today we do have a certain classes, and I believe in the land of India, they still have some classes, even though it is not as bad as it used to be, but still there are different classes in some countries and some cultures rather. And for us Koreans, it's rather a little easier to understand this class system that's mentioned in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, because we had a pretty much similar class system, very royal. The king and the royal family will be on the top of that pyramid, and then it goes down to those honorable people, and then to the middle class, then goes to the lower class, then to slave, and so on, which is probably almost exactly the same as the class system in the Middle East at the time of Jesus, especially the Jewish one. So from king to slave, and these social ranks would determine it pretty much determines their existence. Because if you are born into a family of slaves, then you are going to live as a slave for all your life. And if you're born into the family of the king, royal family, then you automatically become someone very important, and someone who is powerful, and someone who is rather rich and wealthy. So these are the kind of, when you are born into this classified society, the understanding and the mental and the perspective of that particular person who are born into that particular class would have a certain perspective that is quite different from what we have today. For us who are living in a more rather democratic society, and even those so-called socialist states, they have much better freedom of choice for individuals than it was before, many years ago. And when we do have that freedom, we cannot imagine how these people would have had thought about their future and their life. The perspective for us, we believe in this free society. We believe by working hard and having education and so on, then we can improve or change our status that we are born into even. So even if you're born in a poor, uneducated family, depending on how you do it, you have a chance to become a better person or a better position in the society. Well, there are still limits, but much better than what it used to be. So our mindset about our existence and our future is quite different from those who are living in that culture and that social status. So when you are reading the documents in the Bible, and you should not try to understand the documents and the passages and the teachings and the expressions from our position of view or our perspective. That's very common mistake that we make, and when we read the biblical scriptures and the documents in there. So that's something we need to train ourselves intentionally to put ourselves into their position and their mindset. And for example, I believe it's a Philemon. There's a writing about a slave who had ran away, and then the Paul recommends to send them back to the slavery. And then, see, these kind of issues are very, it's not common to us. We are not used to that kind of narratives. So we try our best to put in the position of that runaway slave and try to understand how these advices and then the commands from the Christian leaders would have effect on this particular slave. So that's kind of an example that we want to look into or be careful in reading it. Okay, so there are those many issues regarding that. And then gender ranks. So the gender issues also is again a very different than what we have today. Now, women in this free world would have much bigger more freedom than it used to be 2,000 years ago. As you read, for example, in the case of Jesus feeding 5,000, okay, and Jesus fed 5,000. It's only counting the male adults, age over 12. So that's age over 12 or older male, 5,000 of them. And it doesn't...
Some people said that Jesus is a socialist because he fed 5,000 people from the 5 fish. He took away from someone who has property.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting interpretation. Usually, I mean, the liberal theology, and we used to have a liberation theology, still there in the southern South America, because they interpret the Bible in a certain way to accommodate communism and socialism, and then revolution, social revolution, and so on. So there, that is a kind of within the trend of that kind of perspective and interpretation. Anyway, coming back to the story. So he fed 5,000 male. They didn't count children, and they didn't count women. So gotta be a lot more than 5,000. If there's one male, then it would be another 3 or 4 female. That ratio in the population they are listening, because most male are required to work to earn their living. So to follow Jesus, it takes a very big decision for them, because they are wasting one day worth of wages. So they're losing their money by just following Jesus and trying to listen to him. So that means there will be only a handful of those male who are going to make that kind of decision to follow Jesus, unless they are jobless and or beggars or any of those who are social outcasts. I'm sure there are many of those who are in that 5,000, but still, the ratio would be 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, which means if it's 1 to 3, that there's going to be another 15,000 female and children, so or more. So in that story and other stories as well, the women are considered second-class citizen, and they don't even count when they do the population count. So that shows how the society viewed female population or woman in the society. So from that understanding, to have the story of a Samaritan woman or a woman who had been caught by while doing adultery, and they are not just the law, but they are less than animals from that particular scene and then episode. So when we try to understand Jesus talking to these, the woman who had been caught in the process of adultery, is unthinkable to most Jewish population, especially those who are so proud to be Pharisees or priests or the scribes. They don't even look on these girls or women. So there's that big, not just a big, but uncrossable gap between Pharisees and then that woman that were caught, or Samaritan woman, or some other woman who's been sick for 30 years, and all these people, the women that are mentioned in the gospel, they are most likely be the lowest of the whole society, which means they are poorest, and then they just barely survive day by day. When you are in that situation, this reality, you want to deny this reality, and they do their best to end or terminate this existence. But one thing they didn't think about is suicide. For any Jewish, or for the matter anyone in the Middle Eastern culture, to commit suicide, it means you're automatically going to be in the hell, right? So because of that strong religious belief, their suicide rate in the Middle East is very low compared to us in especially Asian countries. Korea, sadly enough, is one of the highest in OECD countries, the suicide rate. And so the personal belief and religious belief has much to do with how they make their existence. And so that to be a woman in this Palestine culture is something that you do not want to be in it. So when we read the story of these ladies, we want to put ourselves into their position and see the reality from their perspective, which would be much different from how we experience in today's reality. In America or elsewhere, the woman has a much better ranks than it used to be. Then, when we go to the widows and orphans, this would be another social class that we need to have some attention and have some understanding, because widows today or divorcees today, we don't have that discriminatory view on them. But when in that culture, in Jewish culture, and any Middle Eastern culture at the time, being a widow, it means several different things. Number one, the widow, you have maybe had a major sin, so you are left without husband. So it is a sinful thing, and you're judged because you're a widow, unless your husband is killed in a war. That probably ought to be an exception. But if your husband is killed in an accident or died because of illness, and then it will have a big question following you as a widow, and that's people judge you. Another thing, being a widow, it means you are taken out of society, which means, you have no way to earn your own money. See, because it's the same in most of Islam countries. Women cannot go out or do any social activities without having a male family member with that particular woman. So even it is pretty bad. But in the time of Jesus, when you are alone, you became a widow. It means that you have to survive by begging to others or someone's helping hand. Same with the orphans. So when these widow and orphans are mentioned, that means they are helpless and also disregarded and looked down people, as bad as any sick people are, like a sick people with all these so-called unclean sickness. They were kept distance with the society. So same thing happened with these widows and orphans, and they are helpless people.
So that's why in the Old Testament teach that the tithe, giving money, the first priority to give is the widow.
Right. And then, but it's a teaching, but in actuality, reality, it didn't happen the way it was taught. So, see, because it's the same thing in a society today. There are the laws to protect this, how we say, marginal people in the society. But in reality, they are not being helped that much as they should. So the same thing in Old Testament culture, or even in today's Islamic culture, they give a certain portion of their earning to the society as a tax or religious offerings, but there are always those people who are greedy and keep the money to themselves. So that's kind of situation. Okay, now disabled and challenged. Okay, these are again another class who are so-called marginals in the society. And if you're insane today, if you're insane that you have all the this help from the society and you can go to the hospital or institutions for insane, and almost it is free of charge, because it's not your fault that you became insane, and the society is responsible. That's how the America perceives on these issues. But at the time of Jesus, all these are disabled and then physically challenged and then mentally challenged. All these are, as it was considered to be the result of sin. Either your sin or your ancestors' sin caused to have this infirmity or the troubles or problems as a person. So if you become the victim of society or victim of your destiny, then you have no ways to come out of it. And you only look for the help from someone else. That's how it was in that society. So as we read the Bible, we see especially in the Gospels, we read these people who are marginals in the society. And it is kind of surprising for us to find so many stories regarding widows, orphans, and then disabled, challenged, and insane. And then the reason is because Jesus came for these people, one who are outcast, one who are low in the society, one who are oppressed and taken and then manipulated and so on. So when we consider the social background of the New Testament, the major thing is that those who are marginals or low in the society. That would be our first consideration and try to understand how they made their existence and survival. And it's pretty bad. I mean, they just live day by day, and then if you die tomorrow because you don't have anything to eat or you're too sick to, survive all these things, it was nothing. I mean, for them, it was natural. It's something that they live with. And today we don't think that should be the way it should. But we know that some cultures and some societies still the same thing is true. For example, we see that this demonstration going on the campuses, U.S. campuses today. And the reason is because some of them, or majority of them, are against Israel's war against the Gaza area. I mean, even before the war, the Palestine section of that land, they were given, or they've been living there for many, many years. And still, they were all blocked. And then they had a pretty bad economic situation. And then war broke out, and then it gets worse and worse. And in there, the same thing. All the population there, they are suffering. Not all, but majority of the people, 2 million or 3 million population, are suffering as much as they had suffered in the Palestine in the day of Jesus. So, it is still, I mean, after 2,000 years, people think the society will learn and the people learn and will become a better person or better society or better nations. But truth is, people do not change. We do not change. We are just as evil as we were 2,000 years ago. We are unjust as much as we were 2,000 years ago in Palestine, land of Palestine. So it may improve a little bit for just a few years or longest 100 years, but people go back to where we were. So we learn these lessons from reading the scripture. Classes and rank. Continuing. And the possessed, these are the ones who are being possessed by the evil spirit or bad spirits. And we read the story of these possessed in the gospel. And then one story is related to this possessed, and then the casted out demons went into the swines, the pigs, and they ran into the water. Jump out of the cliff, and all were killed and so on. So these people who are possessed, they are also the marginal and outcast, blind, lame, and lepers, slaves, and other illness. So again, when you get sick with this uncurable at the time, even today, some of these are uncurable. If you become blind for some reason, some can be, restored, but most blindness you cannot reverse. And then lepers, what's the modern name for this? Something disease. That also is not curable. So these incurable diseases, when they become the victim of this sickness, they were considered cursed. So if you're cursed, you cannot live with us, with this community, because you are unclean, and you have to get out of this society. So that's how it was. We need to have this full understanding about how they dealt with the social outcast or marginals. So the word marginals and outcast This word classifies many characters that appear in the story of gospel. And again, so by looking at these characters appearing so often in the story of gospel, we again come to the one of the major theme of the gospel. Jesus was for these lost people, people who are lost from society, from the family. They were taken out of family or kicked out of family, and those are solitary, lonely, and then hard to survive people. So Jesus gives attention and care and love to these people, and which means the principle for us, if you're a Christian, you live like a Christ, Jesus, the existence, or be the copy of what Jesus did and how he lived, which means we need to give greater attention or more attention to the people who are marginals or outcast. We cannot deal with every single one of them. That's not possible. But you can do whatever you can to help or to assist or to embrace one of these people who are around you. And that's how the Bible is teaching us. Now, when we are living and when we are existence, these are some of the things that will happen in our lives or our existence And these are so-called important days and then events. Okay. Before the class began, V told me that it is a big celebration in Vietnamese culture. And then we have those things in all the cultures, and the nations would have these celebration or memorials and then day of importance. Also, in your personal life, you would have the day which is important. For example, if you are married, the wedding anniversary would be an important day for husband and wife, which you remember the day of marriage. And then your birthday is important, and so we have birthdays. Almost every culture, all the culture would celebrate one's birthday. And then funerals is another important event. The reason that we are focusing on these personal but so-called key event is because how to celebrate or how to understand this birth and the marriage and funeral is the key to understanding their worldview and perspective and values. So us, the anthropologist, because I studied the cultural, the cross-cultural studies and intercultural studies and so on. So I'm an anthropologist, and as an anthropologist and missiologist, it is important to understand how people view their life and the reality and then thus existence. So the birth, marriage, and funeral shows how that particular culture interprets the reality. Is birth a curse? So in some culture it is. It used to be a curse for any girl born into a Korean family. Not all, but usually it was considered. I mean, if you have a boy, then you celebrate. But if you have a girl, that's not the case. Was that the same in Vietnamese culture? Because the reason was Korea being the society with the Confucian ideals, and plus being an agricultural society, you need a male population for the labor force. So whether it's the high class people or lower class people or farmers, they wanted a boy rather than a girl. So, again, that's kind of how we, approach and interpret. And see, because of the discrimination against a woman, to have a girl in a family, even though you're a woman yourself, the mother would not like having a girl as a baby. So that's kind of social understanding in the time of Jesus and in our culture as well. So that's kind of an example. For funerals, if you look at how the funerals are proceed and how they react to the death, it kind of shows. When I was in Africa, here is a very interesting incident. It was my first year in Africa, and then there's a house right behind me. It's a big house, and one day they had all these musics and sounds and the celebration kind of festival going on right behind our house. So we asked the gardener who's working in our house, and then he told us that it's a funeral. So for us Koreans, it's pretty difficult to accept. They are so having fun and celebrating at the funerals. But later I found out it's one of the common culture in major part of Africa. So that's pretty different perspective about death than how we view. So in our culture in Korea, there is a funeral proceeding. I both sad and then both as also there's certain happiness. It's not exactly happiness, but it's like how do I say, relief. Yeah, relief would be the word. Relief that this person ended this difficult existence in this world and going beyond cross and going to the next world, which most Koreans believe, whether you're Christian or non-Christian, or even before the Christianity come into Korea, they believe there's a better world after this one. So there is a certain sense of relief, and while there's a deep sadness, because it is because we know many of us Korean common people lived very harsh, difficult, and unjust and poor kind of existence in this world. So there's this deep remorse, kind of remorse. We call it Han in Korean language, and it's written in Chinese character. But that sense, that deep remorse is there. So people are, it's not sadness. It's something different feeling that cannot be translated into English. So there's that kind of emotion, feeling, or state of being regarding the death. As a hospice chaplain, I do work with Korean families and non-Korean families, and there's a very distinctive reaction from compared to the Western, usually the white Christian families, compared to Korean Christian families, even though they are Christian. Regarding the death, they react totally different ways. So I see, I observe myself that, the Western, the white Christian families, they seem to accept death as something natural and not something devastating. They are sad, of course. They do go through this grief process, but most of them take it natural. While the Korean Christian families, even though they are Christian, many of them are shocked, devastated, and don't know what to do when they face the death of loved ones. So there is I'm trying to generalize, but there are some who are little out of this main spectrum. But majority Korean Christian families and white Christian families have different reaction about death. And when we go back to the stories, now we know that Nazareth's death, and then the death of the Jairo, the synagogue leader's daughter, death, and so on. There are many deaths recorded in the Gospels, and as you read these deaths, and then you'll have a better understanding of how Jewish people perceived the event of death. And we'll try to, what we are doing is we'll try to understand from their position, their point of view, or their cultural understanding of death rather than our understanding of death. One example that I can take from the Old Testament is the story of Abraham trying to bring his son, only son, to the mountain, the altar, and to give him as an offering to God, because God asked him to do so. And it involves death, and it involves the killing of his own son. And the Bible does not record about the agony and difficulty, and then his troubled mind. These are not there. And you can assume two possibilities. Number one, the Bible just intentionally omit or does not record how he felt and all this trouble. Or number two, he did not have any big trouble giving up his own son, and even he has to kill him himself. So that's pretty much two different possible interpretations regarding the death or killing of his own child. And my assumption is because Abraham did not have not such a deep trouble or difficulties following the command of God, sacrificing his own child. That's only one child, and that's, I think, how they regarded death at the time of Old Testament in the culture of Abrahamic, tribe. So that's my personal interpretation. But you can have your own interpretation on those things. But the point here is how they perceived, or how Abraham perceived the death. And so we try not to interpret Bible from our own cultural or social standpoint. That's a big mistake that we usually make when we try to understand the Bible. And holidays. These holidays is with why? Because in Jewish culture, the holidays are the holidays. It's a day of God, or God commanded, or God-related days. For example, Passover is one of the holy days, because they trying to remember the day they were saved or protected while all these Egyptian child, the firstborn, were killed. So those holidays, when you read either Passover or the day of Sabbath, all these days have importance. It does have implication. So when we see those words, we want to know what it is, the background history, and the importance, the level of importance in the Jewish culture, and how they celebrated it, and then so on. So those holidays are very important in understanding the gospel. Okay, let's take a break and please come back in 10 minutes. It's getting warmer here.
Outside.
Let's continue. Okay, this is the second part of week number 6. Continuing on discussion about social community affairs. So, holidays. Now, the festivities. These festivities not so associated with the holidays, but it is socio-cultural event that has little or nothing to do with their religious belief or with God. So in the Jewish context, to be exact or to be somewhat critical, there is no festivities in Jewish culture that is not related to any divinity or spirituality or religion of Judaism. Everything and all things that they do celebrate or remember has to do with their religious belief. But after Jesus, there are some of the incidents that, the remembrance or memorial days that has to do with political or national situation. But otherwise, as festivities are also holidays. So it's a memorials. But in our cultures, not everything has to do with religious belief. So those are called festivities. So we'll go to next title. Now, social structure. As much as the class is one of the major or macro structure, social structure that we need to have some understanding, but there are some other social structures or paradigms or platforms that is deeply related to their belief, their view of the reality. And when you read the Bible, the word tribe appears quite a lot in the Old Testament. Because it is one of the major paradigm for understanding their society, the tribe, the word tribe is still valid and effective and influential in the time of New Testament. So I told you that the Old Testament is another major fundamental foundation to the background of New Testament. So without having the knowledge and the understanding about the Old Testament, you probably would not have a good understanding of New Testament. And the tribe is one of those examples. So you need to understand what tribe means to Jewish people and which tribe they belongs to would be. It's like sometimes it's like a badge that you wear. To be a tribe of Levites, there will be also privilege, and then it limits who you are and what you can do as a person. Because if you're born into the family of Levites, then your life designation, existence has to do with the temple, altar, and the worship, and so on. So that means you are not able to engage in other professions or vocations. Not only that, tribe of Benjamin or certain tribe is elected and selected, chosen to be the tribe of the Messiah. So in that sense, to be that particular tribe where David belongs to, and then to be a member of that tribe, it has a sense of a pride to it. Then the clan family. The importance of family in a Jewish culture or any Middle Eastern culture or most ancient culture, the Asian culture share the pretty similar notion about the understanding of family as much as they do in a Middle Eastern or Palestinian culture. So for us, it would be rather easier to understand the family, the sense of family and the importance of family or the role of family in the society much better than those who are in Western culture today. In Western world, individual has more importance than family itself. But for us in Asian culture, if you have to make a choice between yourself and family, usually still, and even younger people would give priority to the family. So that's kind of culture that they shared in Middle Eastern culture in the time of Jesus. So it'll be not that difficult for us to understand that family dynamic and then importance of family in a narrative. And the friendship, that's one of the consideration. But in the gospel, there is not so much reference to the personal friendship, and other than disciples being disciples. That the community of disciples is not so focused or based on the fact of friendship, but is on the discipleship. So they are so each disciple should have pretty much close and intimate and relationship to Jesus as a disciple, but they will not share that much friendship. It doesn't look like they are sharing so much friendship among those disciples themselves. I mean, as we read the Gospels, maybe Gospel is not so interested about the friendship, so that's why they did not record it. But just based on the documentation in the Gospels, we don't find so much of friendship episode or narrative or mentioning in the Gospels. Now, then organizations. Today, in a rather more complex society that we live in, organization is more tight and more solid, and it has more importance than the organizations at the time of Jesus. But some organization would have a much greater impact and influence than the organizational influence that we have today. For example, being a part of Sanhedrin or being a member of the Pharisees, that would give you a very distinctive identity or group identity over other organizations. And church at the time of Jesus, being a member of a church or the church at the time is very distinctive identity to a belonging or organization. So it is not like please do not try to associate your church membership to the equal as the church membership in the time of New Testament. in the time of New Testament, it's more serious, much more serious commitment than we make today as a church member. It would be more like being a church member in, let's say, in China, mainland China. Even though they do recognize this Three Self Church as a formal church, there are many non-Three Self churches in China, and most of these churches that are not within that Three Self title, they are being persecuted. And to become a Christian in Chinese society today is still it's a big commitment. You have to make a very serious decision to be a Christian in China. And if we go to these Middle Eastern states, not all of them, but many of them, you have to make a very serious decision to become a believer or Christian in those cultures. So probably it would be the somewhat similar depth or intensity of commitment that you have to make that decision. So if you read becoming a believer or being a member of a church just lightly as we becoming a church member in today's free society, that's a big mistake. So when we read those passages in the Gospels, we need to reconsider or remember how it was serious decision and business to be a member of a church and to proclaim that you are indeed the follower of Jesus. So that's kind of a thing that you need to consider in terms of organization, because the organization that we talk about in the gospel is being a member of a church. So that's where we. Then groups and bands. Groups and bands. Okay. Here's an example of groups and bands in the New Testament gospel stories. Here's Jesus and the followers, the disciples. The disciples, there are 12 of them, including Judas, Iscariot Judas. So these are kind of bands or groups, or in Korean there is a good word, pegori. It's a good word for how we describe these people. I mean, every culture would have a pretty similar word that connotates the same meaning. So it's not a formal, organized, visible structure, but it is like a gang. It's a similar, but not quite as same as. But it's like a gangster-like term. So the bands or these groups, informal groups, there's a Jesus group, and then there is a group by John the Baptist. So John's group and the Jesus group, or bands, are one of the prominent or visible groups that are at the time of Jesus, and people know about it because unlike today's society, they did not have television or radio or any SNS or these stuff. So their communication was by mouth to mouth. So it's oral communication, but remarkable thing about this oral communication or the mouth-to-mouth communication is that it spreads really fast. Even though, I mean, we imagine and think that because it's a ancient old society, don't have television, there's no mass communication, but this personal mouth-to-mouth communication is as much as effective and faster than as fast as today's mass communication. So when there is a story or event that happened yesterday, probably most of the residents in Jerusalem would have heard already after 24 hours. So that fast. Because when you are in that ancient community and society, put yourself in there. What are some entertainment? There's no entertainment. There's no television, no shows, no movie places, and so on. So their interest, most common people, think of most common people. I just forget about the kings and those high officials. They have their own business to take care of. But most common people, farmers and then fishermen, they entertain by ears, because there's nothing to see other than the rural scene they face every day. But news, they try to listen to the new stuff, news or gossip every day. That's their first primary interest, especially the woman, because they gather at the well, the like a Samaritan woman. She went in there, avoiding the population, but most women come to well and then talk and talk. So it spreads so fast. And that's how it was. I know this because, same thing in old Korean society. They didn't have anything that is entertaining. So a lot of talks and gossips. And same thing there. So these things that are happening in the gospel, you assume that's only limited to the people, the characters in that are mentioned there, but the actual reality is anything that happens yesterday. For example, Lazarus was revived from that tomb. He was there in already 3 days, and he was smelling, and then he came out walking. That news spread to the whole Israel real fast. I'm sure that it did. So is a resurrection of Jesus. So all these so-called big events, and including also small events, were spreading like wildfire. So that will be the case in the Jewish society at the time of Jesus. So those groups and bands, the Jesus group and John's group, it's like today's the girl group or BTS, and they're popular. So that's the news they were trying to listen and look for. So that's how the society was. Then other miscellaneous stuff. We talked about slavery. Slavery is one thing that's sustained in the society and culture. In America, for example, there's a modern slavery. It's not in the form of a slavery like they don't have any personal freedom, and they were sold and bought like other property, but it's different. But slavery in terms of the lowest social structure and the most people who are doing all the hard labors it's the same today. I mean, only thing is they are being paid. So, in any cultures and society today, if we look at the economic stratas, the structures, there are those people who are the lowest in the pyramid of economic structure, who are doing the hardest and the difficult and dirty jobs, and yeah, they are being paid for it. But there are those people. But the slavery at the time would be much different than what we see today. They didn't have the freedom to choose who they belong to or where to work, where to live, and they are not being paid. So it's a free labor. And they are told to work in a certain intensity, and which is a very intense labor. So we need to understand that term when there is a slave or servant even. Only the difference between the slavery and servant is a servant is being paid a certain amounts, and they have freedom to choose where to work and who to work and so on. But even though theoretically they do have this freedom to choose, in reality they did not. Servants belong to certain family or a certain household, and once you belong to that certain household, that you live there. Probably you will die in that household as well. So it's like a lifetime commitment to be a servant to a certain household at the time of Jesus. So there is a slavery and servanthood, which is a little different, but as these slavery and slaves and servants are mentioned a lot in the both Old Testament and the New Testament. So try to understand what the actual reality is with the narrative. Then we need to understand who they were and how they were treated and what their position was in society and so on. Prisoners of war. Pretty much they are the ones who become slaves. The reason this prisoners of war is important for us as we try to read the Old Testament, not New Testament, but Old Testament, which is the background to the New Testament, is because the idea of a diaspora and remnant and return. These are the three terms that you want to remember as you read regarding this prisoner or exile. Exiles or captives. These are the words that are used in the Old Testament to describe generally in New Testament they are called diaspora. These are the people whose ancestry is Jewish, but live not in Israel or Jerusalem, but outside Israel and Judea. So they are the ones, diaspora or the exile or captives. The reason they become the exile is two big events, one by the Babylonian and one by the Assyrians. They conquered northern Israel and southern Judah, and they took prisoners of war, a lot of them, to their own country and made them slaves. So when you become a prisoners of war, whether you're soldiers or civilians, you are being labeled as slavery. One of the examples that we see in the Bible, well-known character would be Daniel. Daniel is also prisoner of war. Only difference is because he's a smart, He's from the royal family. He was considered to be the agent or the leader of the Jewish people that were kept or become captives, and use him to rule and control these people. So Babylonians, they trained these specially separated or selected group of young people and educated them in their culture and their religion and their mindset, so they'll become their sort of dog to watch over these people. So that was the idea and design. And then Daniel, at the age of 12 or 13, he rejected, or he denied. He was against that idea, and then he was determined not to eat or become brainwashed by Babylonians. That's a story that we read in the Bible. Anyway, going back to the idea of exile and captives. These are the ones who are prisoners of war taken from the Jerusalem or the Judea, Israel. So those who are worthy of labor, except the children and some woman, and then older woman, and then the older guys, they took these young men and women from Jerusalem, Judea, and then Israel to their land to make them slaves. And with that, there are words. In the Bible, remnant is an Old Testament concept and the word, but Jesus used this concept to designate us who are remaining in faith when we are being persecuted. So the word remnant is originally, it has two interpretation, or the definition, two cases of remnant. Case one, the remnant who became diaspora by being exiles and captives. And the first generation, then second generation, third and fourth generation. For example, Nehemiah. Nehemiah is the probably second or third generation Jews who lived in Babylon, and he comes back. But the return is, I can't remember exactly when that was, but there's a big return of Jewish people who were allowed to go back to Israel after being captive for, I think it's 3 generations. This new king, he decided to just free them and send back to Jerusalem. Those are called returned. So if you read the end of, I think in the Chronicles or Kings, there's a story of these Jewish people going back to Jerusalem, the Israel and Judea. So these are called returned. Those who choose not to return to Israel, even after the king said, okay, you guys can go home and go back to your country. And then there are ones who decide, I don't want to go back. I'll live here and remain here. Those are called remnants. And another remnant are those who are left in the city, the Jerusalem and Israel, without being the captive and exiled to the land of Babylon or Assyria. So that's another definition of a remnant. But mainly, the remnant, when it is used in the Old Testament, it means those who are brought to Assyria and Babylon and did remain as diaspora. The idea of this diaspora and then exile, captive, remnant, and returned have very close or meaningful implication for us Christians today. Us Christians are diaspora in this world. We are not residents. We are becoming a diaspora, meaning living in a different culture. So we are living amongst the worldly culture, and we are Christians. So we Christians are diaspora to this world. And we want to be remnant in Jesus Christ. Just rooting our faith in this Christian belief. Even in the time of persecution and oppression and the attack from Antichrist and so on, we want to strongly remain in this Christian belief. So that's the implication of remnant for us and in the New Testament. So the term, the diaspora, remnant, and then returned are very significant for us Christians and also in understanding New Testament background. Then we have this intermarriage. Intermarriage naturally happened on the second or third generation of Jews who were brought into Assyria and Babylon. When you live in that different culture, you have this cross-ethnic or cross-racial marriage. It's called intermarriage. This will happen, it is happening in America as well. Korean Americans, the first generation Koreans came, and then they have a second generation Korean Americans, and the majority, at least 1 out of 2 Korean Americans who are getting married in America, they choose to marry another ethnic group other than Korean. So I think that rate is going to increase as we go into third and fourth generation immigrants. But at the second generation Korean Americans, I think at least 1 out of 2 will marry someone who is not a Korean heritage. So those are called intermarriage. For us, the Korean parents, first generation Korean parents, it will become issues sometimes. Not always, but some parents are having difficulties or negative perspective about intermarriage. But it's a social and cultural. But for Jews, it's not only social, cultural, but it is religious and spiritual. So if your son who is a Jew marries a non-Jew, that would not be so much issue because they will be still considered Jewish. But if your daughter marries non-Jew, then it becomes an issue because their offsprings or children will be considered non-Jew. So that's kind of culture. And that helps us to understand who the Samaritan woman is. She is a children of those Jewish mother who married non-Jewish husband, father. So for them, they are not considered Jew or outcast. Again, one of the outcast and marginals. Now, probably this is the most important element in understanding called the background of New Testament, called the cultural background, is the most significant and the most influential in understanding the message that we read in the Gospels and then other New Testament documents. See, to understand the culture in a systematic way, when we say a culture, it's a big thing, it's a broad and sometimes ambiguous, sometimes it's not so exact or vague. So to avoid that vagueness and ambiguity, we try to analyze or systemize the culture into these categories. So when we talk about a culture, at least in this class, it includes these aspects or domains or subcultures, so-called. In anthropology, we call these subcultures. First, religious or spiritual. Even though in modern days, this religious or spiritual aspect seems to be disregarded or regarded lightly, but for me, and as an anthropologist, this spiritual domain of cultural aspect is the key to understanding any culture, whether it's modern or whether it's ancient culture. So we give the first priority in then understanding the spirituality or religious aspect or domain of a particular culture to understand the background. It's rather easy for us to understand the Jewish culture in terms of religious or spirituality, because basically we can assume the culture or religious spirituality in the time of Jesus in the land of Galilee and Jerusalem and Israel and Judea is Judaism, believing in one God. And they still believe in the Torah, and then those first 5 books of the Old Testament is important and it dominates their life and so on. But there's one major element in trying to understand their spirituality. Because of this issue of diaspora, who had returned from Babylon and Assyria, where the spirituality is totally different. They worship idols, all these objects and the animals and the trees and stones and so on. They brought that idea back with them. I mean, you cannot avoid, if they become second or third generation, the first generation's belief and spirituality is not going to go directly down to their second generation or third generation. It doesn't matter how hard you try to. If you are living in a foreign country, in a foreign culture, Gentile culture, for second, third generation, they are being influenced. And they'll bring that idea somehow, without even knowing it, back to their country. So the Jerusalem and Israel at the time of Jesus is certainly have been influenced, impacted by those ideas from Babylon and Syria. Whether you like it or not, it did happen. Again, another thing, as we later look into the history, they're under Roman Empire. And they're under this Hellenistic culture. And it's a new thing. It's just like us in, Asia. China, Korea, Vietnam, Japan, all these Asian countries, they are not sustaining their traditional culture. The reason is because the Western culture, with the Western idea and things, it came in, and also with the education, there is so much of the Western ideas and elements that we do study in the education system. Thus, it's almost 50-50 or even more. The Western, this idea and the culture, whether it's a pop culture or the idea of the philosophy or thoughts or democracy, whatever. Socialism and communism are both the product of Western culture. So these things came into us in Asian society and culture and did change. Not just the change, it revolutionized. It's totally upside down. So the same, not the same degree, but similar degree of influence from the Hellenistic culture, Greco-Roman cultures came into the land of Israel, Jerusalem, and the people. Because they used, not only they were under the political colonial government, but they used the Greek as their writing tools. And they were able to understand not only their own the culture, but they were able to read and write the Greek ideas and the cultures. So it's natural for anyone who were raised in that context and that reality would have a big influence from their ideas. So that is among not only the learned, but general population, so-called common people, also had been influenced greatly by this Hellenistic culture. So we need to put that element as we try to understand the story of the gospel, and especially when we read letters to Corinthians, Thessalonians, and Ephesians. All these regions that I just mentioned are not Jerusalem, and it's not Israel. It's outside Israel. It's the diaspora places. So they have more greater influence than the people in Jerusalem or in Israel. So when you read the latter part, for example, the Romans, Thessalonians, Corinthians, all other these books that are mentioned, and those places in so-called Asian Minors, and some of them are in Turkey today. The population who are reading the writings of Paul or Peter, they are in this diaspora culture. So we need to put that in our mind and put that into account as we try to understand the message. So the writers at the time, whether it's a Paul or Peter, for example, Paul. Let's think of the Paul. He he wasn't born in Israel. He was born in outside Israel, and not only born there, but he was educated there, and lived for many up to he become a believer. So that means Paul had been influenced by this Hellenistic Greco-Roman culture greatly, much more than others. He was able to read and write Greek, and probably he was able to speak some Spanish, almost like it. So he was multicultural and very intelligent, intellectual, highly educated, and that means he is, even though he was in the clan of the Pharisees, and was educated by Gamaliel, who is one of the best scholars in Judaic religion and the law. Still, he does have influence from this other Gentile cultures. So spirituality is not totally 100% Jewish. It's not, or Judaism. That's not the case. So please do not assume that when you read the Judaic tradition, the story of the gospel, except those Pharisees who were brought and raised in the land of Israel and Judea, like Nicodemus, he is totally 100% Jewish and Judaic radical, but otherwise they are not. But the political context as a cultural context would be quite a key to understanding when Jesus is being brought into the court of Pilate to be sentenced. So those, and also story of a centurion, Roman centurion, the captain of Roman army. These are some of the things that we want to understand regarding their political situation. And then how the Iscariot Judas responded or believed Jesus to be the political Messiah. That also has to do with their political context or situation. So, it was natural for them after having them the years and years of Roman occupation and Roman rule. Their primary need or the understanding of the term Messiah would be political. So for Judas, it was natural for him. He's not someone who is out of the context or very unique, but general population, most of them would have thought Jesus to be the political Messiah. That's why these people came in hundreds and thousands to welcome him to Jerusalem on the right before Passover, singing Hosanna and the King. For them, after 3 years of hearing who Jesus is and how he was becoming popular, and he became a political figure, whether Jesus liked it or not. They expected him to be a political figure, and that's why they, were asking and welcoming Jesus to the Jerusalem, because that's the day of inauguration for them. They wanted to make Jesus the king and to overthrow the Roman colonial power. So that's the kind of political context that we need to look into. So if we just look at the story of Jesus entering the Jerusalem with the Hosanna people shouting, if you try to look at that as from our Christian point of view, only a religious point of view, then you don't have the right interpretation or perspective. Okay, time's up for this week, and this will conclude week number 6. And thank you for listening and coming. And we'll take the